Hello and welcome to VIVA Financial Tuition's in-depth industry analysis for the strategic case study of May 2017. My name is Hugo Newman and I'd like to thank you for choosing to study with us here at VIVA Financial Tuition. Before I begin, let me just give you a quick overview of the contents of this industry analysis. So I'll begin with a little introduction and personal background about myself. And then I'll move straight into the meat of the industry analysis, and I'm going to start with a kind of global outlook. I'm going to be looking at the sales, revenues, growth trends in this particular industry, the soft drinks industry, and I'll break it down as well by category, by the kinds of products that are being sold, and I'll look at how things have been developing in recent years, and I'll also look at how things are expected to develop in the coming years within this industry. In the third section, then I'll move on to the industry structure. I'm going to be looking at how companies within the industry function, from the supply side to the manufacturing, the distribution, and eventually to things like licensing and franchising, and how the different relationships between these different segments work out in practice. In the fourth section then, I'm going to be looking at some consumer trends and changes within the industry. I'm going to be looking particularly at demographics and also changing attitudes among consumers and customers and how this affects the strategy of companies within the industry going forward over the coming years. In section 5 then, I'm going to look at the related issue of governments and campaigns and how these are impacting on the industry as a whole and how companies are trying to react and deal with these changes. I'm looking at it from the perspective of particularly health concerns and also at innovations from the point of view of companies, how they're trying to develop new products, new brands, and different kinds of drinks that appeal to the changing demands coming from both consumers and government and regulatory impositions. And then finally, in section 6, I'll draw some important conclusions from everything that's come before and how this impacts on a company like Fizz going forward into the next 2 or 3 years. So, as I said at the beginning, my name is Hugo Newman and I hold a PhD from University College Dublin. My research focused primarily on the interaction between political regulation, economic development, and institutional ethics. So I think I'm quite well placed to guide you through this component of the preparation process for the strategic case study in May 2017, looking at how broader economic and political factors can impact upon companies and an institution's decision making going forward. So we'll begin with the global outlook and the macro view, as I call it, and I'm going to start with the product categories. So I'm looking here at the different kinds of products that are being sold by soft drinks manufacturers, broadly speaking. So we can see here the beverage industry is the overall industry. It's another way of describing the soft drinks industry. Particularly, we're looking at non-alcoholic beverages, as you can see here in the second row. And this breaks down further then into a number of different categories, including carbonated soft drinks, or CSDs for short, fruit beverages, bottled waters, functional drinks, sports drinks, and then other as well. Now, these categories are sometimes broken down in slightly different ways. Sometimes people use slightly different terms to describe the same categories, but I'm going to be broadly sticking to this kind of categorization for the purposes of this industry analysis. But at times as well, I will be using analyses and I'll be using figures and data that use different categories or kind of different terms to describe the same things. And where that's the case, I'll let you know which category I'm talking about specifically in case there's any confusion. So you can see here carbonated soft drinks or CSDs, you have cola and you also have non-cola drinks. So for example, things like 7-Up, Sprite, and various other soft drinks that are carbonated and have a lot of sweeteners or sugar involved. Then in the fruit beverages section, we have different kinds. We have 100% fruit juices, okay, so things like orange juice or your morning orange juice like Tropicana, for example. Then you have fruit drinks, which are not necessarily 100% based on fruit juices, but they would have maybe a fruit juice component or percentage within them, or some kind of syrup that's extracted from fruits, fruit extract or fruit concentrate. And then broadly speaking, juice drinks, which may include flavored drinks using artificial flavors to replicate the particular fruit juice. Then we have bottled waters. Okay, this is fairly self-explanatory. Unflavored and flavored is included in that, and you also have carbonated waters included in that category as well. Functional drinks then, this includes a number of different kinds. You have first energy drinks, But you also have ready-to-drink teas and coffees. So these are things like iced teas, for example. And you also have chilled cappuccino drinks. We're seeing them more and more frequently now in drinks aisles. And also things like relaxation drinks. We'll come back to these categories because these are fairly new on the scene. And they're also a growing segment within the industry. So we'll talk a little bit more about them in later sections. Then we have sports drinks, things like Lucozade and Gatorade, for example, as you're all familiar with, I'm sure. Again, increasingly becoming popular as a perceived healthy alternative to carbonated soft drinks. You also have powdered sports drinks, okay, and this is where you're actually just provided with a powder that you then add to water yourself. And finally, we have this section other, and this is kind of dairy or soy based drinks, and this is a fairly marginal category, broadly speaking, within the non-alcoholic beverages industry. So there are the categories. Now let's take a look at some of the raw numbers and data from recent years. So we're looking here at the trends from 2012 through to 2017 and the percentage changes in terms of growth for the different categories of soft drink beverages. So you can see here we have bottled water, carbonates, fruit and vegetable juice, and then we have the specialty functional drinks like teas and so on. You have Asian specialty drinks here as a separate category in this particular analysis, and others then accounts for everything else that's not included from the previous segmentation that we looked at. So as you can see here, we have carbonates are growing at the lowest rate of all the categories. You can see here only 9.4% growth relative to the other categories in the period 2012-2017. And of course, one of the big movers was bottled water, and also the specialty drinks and the RTD or functional beverages as well showed very healthy growth. So we're going to come back to these categories and discuss them in a little bit more detail as we proceed through the industry analysis and look at them from a strategic point of view. But certainly it seems as if the growth of carbonates or carbonated soft drinks, as they're sometimes referred to, is in decline, and we'll see this as we look through some of the other numbers in the next few slides. So here again you can see global soda consumption here, and it says it's rising at about the same rate as the population of the world. Okay, so again, that's not particularly promising in terms of growth numbers when it tracks the population growth. That indicates that we're really looking at it in relative terms. We're looking at a flat development in terms of consumption of soda. So not particularly optimistic numbers from the point of view of carbonated soft drinks. And as you can see here in this little excerpt, it says while the industry is expected to experience modest growth driven by more innovative products and the changing demographic trends, the actual industry growth rate is expected to lag behind GDP growth. Okay, so again, GDP, comparing it to GDP, not just population growth, but the general GDP growth, in terms of global sales, things are looking relatively poor. For the soft drink industry as a whole. It's merely tracking and in some cases lagging behind both population and GDP. And this is from the phlpnet.org website, and it has an analysis of the industry which is very worth looking at if you're interested. It's called Breaking Down the Chain, a guide to the soft drinks industry. And I'll be using some data from that analysis in this particular industry analysis. If you want to look for more information, that's a good place to start. I also include at the end, of course, in the document that you will receive with your Smarter Study Pack, useful further reading and sources that you can look into yourself in your spare time if you have a desire to do so. So let's move on. Look at this next graph here. And this is from Statista.com, a very useful website for looking at trends and global sales and revenues and profit trends in various industries and sectors. So you can see here the soft drink sales worldwide in 2012 and 2017, again from this 5-year period. And it's broken down here by region rather than by category of drink. So as you can see here, major growth in the Asia Pacific region, and as you can see as well, North America and Europe are seeing fairly underwhelming growth, it has to be said, from 2012 to 2017. Perhaps not surprising given that it's mature markets we're looking at here, But overall, things are not looking particularly exciting in these regions. Latin America is seeing again some pretty modest, pretty healthy growth. But again, this probably tracks the general emerging markets trend in that area. Middle East and Africa, moderate growth. Eastern Europe, more or less similar to Western Europe and North America. And as you can see, Australasia is almost not moving at all in this period. So really, emerging markets are the only markets that are giving any signs of substantial growth for this particular sector. Soft drink sales overall are fairly modest, it has to be said. Now we're looking at forecasts here, and this is one analysis from Euromonitor. And as you can see, there is going to be relatively steady growth if you're looking at it in terms of total volume over the coming years through to 2020. So the global growth rate in soft drinks as a broad category is expected to improve, but only moderately, it has to be said. And if you look at the percentage in terms of growth compared to previous years, it's moving down as we go through to 2020 in terms of year-on-year growth percentages. So steady, but again, not particularly spectacular. So this is a challenging industry in terms of growth forecasts. You can see here, this is broken down again in terms of projections from 2015 to 2020. And it also has a little colour breakdown here corresponding to the different major soft drink manufacturers in Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. But again, you're seeing here, bottled water is a big grower for this period. They're expecting that to be the major growth segment. Sports and energy drinks also are looking positive. Juice to a lesser extent, because again, we'll come back to this. Juices tend to be quite high sugar content, whereas at least sports and energy drinks have a perception of health associated with them, which kind of insulates them from the health concerns that we'll talk about a little bit later. And of course, carbonates looking pretty modest by comparison. So bottled water and carbonates, the ones really to keep your eye on there, because carbonates historically, of course, have been the major source of revenues. And of course, they still constitute, as we'll see in terms of absolute numbers, the greatest source of revenue for major global soft drinks manufacturers. But bottled water is, in terms of growth, the one that's making big waves in the worldwide industry. Looking at it regionally again in terms of forecasts, and here we have forecast through 2021, and this is what's expected to be the global beverage consumption forecast for 2021. And this is overall soft drink beverages, including all the categories that we've been looking at. You can see here, Asia is expected to be the really big consumer in terms of absolute consumption. And you see Western Europe, 9.2%, North America, 8.7%, and Latin America moving quite nicely as well into a 17.2% share. And this is one source is it's Canadians' expectations about what's going to be the case in 2021. So again, Latin America and Asia, the major segments there internationally. And we can see here in this qualitative analysis from the same source, in 2021, the data shows an increasing volume migration from developed to emerging markets, not surprisingly perhaps. And you can also see then North America and Western Europe have a combined share in the year 2000 of nearly 1/3 of the global beverage consumption, and that's going to shrink in terms of its share to 18%, just 18% in 2021. So the shares are really shifting over the next few years. If you're comparing it to the beginning of the millennium, things are changing quite substantially, and Asia, of course, is the big mover in terms of share, 47.2% expected in 2021 if things continue as they are going at the moment based on current trends. Let's focus now on the US, because of course the US has traditionally been one of the major markets for soft drink consumption. And you can see here, this is very indicative of trends generally speaking in the Western world in terms of carbonated soft drinks. And here this chart says, of course, only soft drinks, but we're talking specifically about carbonated soft drinks here. Sometimes analysts use those two interchangeably, so just bear that in mind as we proceed through the analysis here. And you can see this is from 1987 through to 2015, and this is based on a 2015 estimate. It was actually from this analysis the year 2014. But you can see here, things are looking pretty grim in terms of per capita consumption of carbonated soft drinks in the US. Things are in a very steady decline in terms of per capita consumption, and it's likely to continue that way for the foreseeable future. Okay, and you can see here another source. This is from a Beverage Digest, quoted in Fortune magazine. The US soda sales are fizzling, according to this analysis. Demand for most big brands has dropped substantially in 2015. So you can see here the major players again: Coke, Pepsi Cola, Diet Coke, Mountain Dew and Diet Pepsi have all fallen, in some cases quite substantially, in terms of sales and demand, and only Dr. Pepper and Sprite have come out looking in any way positive based on this analysis. Sprite, perhaps one way of explaining this is the fact that it relatively speaking has a health perception within the carbonated soft drinks market, because it's clear, it resembles carbonated water, and perhaps this kind of image of clarity is associated with health to a greater degree than the darker coloured soft drinks that you get in other categories. That may be the case. So this is again another indication that health perception really is fundamental in this industry, not necessarily even the actual health content, because of course Sprite has just as high a sugar content as these other popular sodas in the US and in other countries. How about now we look at the Asia trends, given that Asia is going to be a big mover over the coming years. We're looking here at how things have developed in recent years in terms of their per capita sales of different kinds of beverages. You can see here fruit drinks are the real big movers in terms of percentage growth year on year, and caloric soft drinks, that is to say carbonated soft drinks, have been much more modest in terms of their growth. Of course, they are absolutely greater in terms of the number of sales per capita per day in this region, but not growing very well, and it's expected that that will begin to taper off. Even in the emerging markets, carbonated soft drinks and health perceptions are becoming more and more important, as we'll see. And sports and energy drinks, fairly modest growth there as well, it has to be said, and perhaps there's more potential there in the Asian markets to exploit the sports and energy drinks segment, because it has had considerable success in terms of growth in recent years in Western markets, and often it's the case that Western trends dictate or anticipate Asian trends in the foreseeable future. You can see here regional growth forecasts, okay, for carbonated soft drinks, and we're looking at it Middle East and Africa first. We're going to still see growth in these regions for carbonated soft drinks in Asia Pacific as well. Latin America then to a much lesser extent. Eastern Europe, much more modest growth there to 2020, and negative then growth in terms in the regions of Australasia, Western Europe and North America, that is to say the developed, so-called developed or Western nations, looking pretty negative for carbonated soft drinks. And again, we're going to finish here with, just to give you a very a very visual representation of just how much bottled water is caught up in recent years with carbonated soft drinks and the declines that we're seeing in those other areas. You can see here also that in terms of absolute numbers, it's really gone down in terms of gallons consumed per capita. And water is jumping consistently since the year 1985. Bottled water has had a huge increase in popularity, and it's actually in fact catching up in terms of gallons per capita in the US and Europe. And this is probably going to anticipate trends elsewhere as emerging markets become more industrialized and developed. Okay, let's begin now with the industry structure analysis. I'm going to begin here with the carbonated soft drink overview, in terms of overviewing the supply chain and how things develop through the various stages of the manufacturing and distribution process. So you can see here we start with the syrup producer. Now, the industry itself tends to be, when people are analysing it, analysts look at this industry, they tend to distinguish between what's called the flavouring syrup and concentrate manufacturing process and the soft drink manufacturing process. These are considered to be two kind of sub-industries within the industry overall. And the major players, PepsiCo and Coca-Cola in the Western world, and now of course globally as well, they have huge reach, tend to focus and tend to have a lot of their profits in terms of proportions coming from the flavouring syrup and concentrate manufacturing process. We'll look into this in a little bit more detail as we go on, and I'll explain in more detail why that is the case and what that means and how things are beginning to change in that respect. So you can see we start here with the blending of raw materials to form a syrup concentrate for a specific beverage. Then we see there's a question, is this a diet beverage? If it is, then in the syrup production manufacturing process, they actually add the artificial sweeteners to the syrup in the manufacturing plant itself. And then what they do is they package both the syrups, both the diet and the non-diet syrups for shipment. And in the case of non-diet beverage syrups, what happens is in the next stage, you can see here everything's moved to the bottling plant, and in this phase is where the sugars are added to the non-diet beverage syrups. So the regular Coca-Cola and Sprite, for example, would have the sugars added by the bottler and not actually in the manufacturing plant itself. And then if it's a diet beverage, this step is skipped. The syrups and sugars are not added, and we move straight to the adding of water and carbonate, and then it's bottled in an appropriate container, whether it's a can or a bottle or some kind of cardboard container if that's appropriate. And that's moved then into the packaging process, and that's ready for shipment to merchants, either directly or indirectly, as you can see in the next phase. Then we have the distribution process. The distributor might receive the product and they will then in turn deliver it to the merchants or the final customer. Or in some cases, the bottler will have a delivery system within the bottling plant, from the bottling plant directly to the merchandisers or the final consumers. So that's how the structure looks overall for the carbonated soft drink industry. And indeed, this is the way things work for many of the other products that are produced within the broad category of soft drinks. So as I mentioned, there's this distinction here between soft drink manufacturing specifically and the concentrate syrup manufacturing process. And it's typically subdivided for the sake of analysis into these two sub-industries. And the former, proportionately speaking, is much more profitable, as we'll see. And in the US, for example, just to illustrate, revenues from syrup concentrate manufacturing are in and around $8 billion per year, while revenues from soft drink manufacture are around $50 billion. And this is for the major manufacturing companies like PepsiCo and Coca-Cola. And then, however, profits in the former stand at around $1.5 billion, while the latter generates only about $1.7 billion. Okay, so you can see profits versus revenues here in terms of percentages. There's a much higher percentage of profits to revenues for the syrup concentrate manufacturing sub-industry than for the soft drink manufacturing sub-industry. So here again we can see this is illustrated in the case of Coca-Cola. You can see the flavouring syrup concentrate manufacturing industry is an $8 billion industry per year, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. And the reason why this is the case is specifically because of the bargaining power that these two major players in the industry have, Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. You can see here that they're projected to fare somewhat more favourably than the manufacturing industry from a profit perspective in the flavouring and syrup and concentrate manufacturing industry. And the reason for this is that there are two highly recognisable companies dominating the industry in Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, and this power allows them then to pass on any increases in input costs to the bottlers, who then will have to actually absorb those costs in terms of pricing in a different way, differential pricing or discriminating with price. So this major bargaining power is the fundamental reason within the industry for the higher relative profits for the flavouring syrup and concentrate manufacturing process compared to the soft drink manufacturing process, which is associated with bottlers. So we'll come back to this further on in terms of strategy implications, but this certainly allows these kinds of major companies to sustain higher margins in the revenues that they generate from the syrup and flavouring syrup and concentrate production. Okay, so let's look now at bottlers and the role that they play in this industry. So their main job is obviously to mix the syrup, as mentioned, with the ingredients and bottle the soft drink in a variety of containers before packaging it for distribution. And the locations of these bottling plants tend to follow a similar pattern to the locations of the syrup manufacturers for obvious reasons, in terms of the ease of distribution and ease of communication, but also in terms of accessing the populations in more warmer climates or higher demand climates or regions within the relative country. In this case, in the US, typically in California is one of the major areas in terms of the proportion of bottling plants and syrup manufacturing plants in that region in the United States. We'll come back to bottlers and we're going to talk a little bit more about the licensing relationship and the franchise relationship that has historically been typical of this, of the relationship between bottlers and the syrup concentrate manufacturers. But here you can see again, this is just a closer analysis of the bottling responsibilities and processes. We've already looked through this, but if you want to look through it again yourself, just to familiarize yourself with the steps that are involved in the bottling process. You can see here the diet beverage thing is crucial, is whether or not the concentrate that has been delivered is diet or not diet. Okay, so making any kind of mistakes or mix up in this process could cause a huge amount of disruption and could cause many losses, unnecessary inefficiencies in the process. So ensuring that this is highly automated, this distinguishing process, so that any potential problems are eliminated and preempted, is very, very important, of course, for the bottling process. It's one of the most important steps in this process. And then, of course, the shipping is open to question whether or not there's going to be outsourcing in this case, or whether or not this is going to be internalized by the bottler themselves, whether they want to outsource the delivery to another company, a distribution company, or whether they want to actually do this themselves and deliver directly to merchants, and whether or not that's a more profitable or efficient way of doing things. Then we look at the distribution channels themselves. This is where and how the actual soft drinks reach the final consumer.